My friends, let us come together for a moment of inner stillness and allow a great truth to reveal itself. For too long, humanity has struggled under a false premise, a premise so deeply embedded in our consciousness that we hardly notice it is there. We have come to believe that supply is something outside ourselves, something to reach for, to acquire, to manipulate or manifest. And because we have accepted this illusion, the entire human experience of lack, fear, and anxious seeking has taken root in us. You see, the world has taught you to chase after forms, money, opportunities, clients, possessions, as if these were the substance of your life. But none of these are supply. They are only the shadows of supply, the outer appearance of an inner reality that exists long before the world begins to shape itself into form. When you look to these outer shadows for your well-being, you turn your back on the very source from which all forms arise. You begin living as a branch cut off from its vine, trying to draw nourishment from the air instead of from the living root. Let us make something clear from the beginning. There is no power in money, and there is no supply in matter. There is no life in the dollar bill any more than there is life in a photograph of a tree. The mistake, the great universal mistake, is believing that the photograph can feed you. And so the world strives and fears and pushes and manipulates and prays to an external God for financial improvement, never realizing that the true storehouse is not out there in the world at all. The kingdom of God, which is the infinite abundance of spirit, is within you. Now, I would have you notice how the human mind rushes at this truth with questions. But Joe, how will my bills be paid? How will I support my family? How will I secure my future? And the answer is always the same. These questions arise only because you have trusted the wrong source. You have looked to form instead of cause. You have sought supply in dollars rather than in consciousness. And the moment you do this, fear becomes inevitable, because form is temporary and changing, while spirit is eternal, infinite, and unfailingly present. Let us be clear. God does not distribute supply as rewards. God does not withhold supply as punishment. God does not measure your worthiness, your effort, or your manifesting technique. Supply is not something God gives. Supply is what God is. And the moment you understand this, the moment you turn within and recognize the presence as the very substance of your life, the struggle begins to dissolve. You stop trying to make things happen, and you begin to rest in the truth that all things are already fulfilled in the invisible. So today, we begin with a simple invitation. Release the belief that money is supply, that opportunities are supply, that outer conditions are supply. For as long as you depend on these for your good, you will live at the mercy of their fluctuations. But when you turn within and acknowledge the infinite storehouse of spirit as your true and only source, you will discover a freedom that no outer circumstance can take away. We are not here to improve the human sense of wealth. We are here to awaken to the spiritual fact that the abundance of God is already expressing itself through your consciousness, and that nothing can be added to it, and nothing can be taken from it. The work before us is not to accumulate more, but to recognize that we have always been living in the midst of infinite supply. Now, my friends, having laid the foundation that supply does not exist in form, let us move deeper into the reason why so many sincere seekers continue to struggle, despite affirmations, despite visualizations, despite countless techniques aimed at manifesting abundance. And the reason is simply this. They are still seeking second instead of seeking first. They are still approaching life from the standpoint of effect, never having understood that effect has no power to sustain them. Let us examine this quietly. Whenever you attempt to improve a condition, whether it be financial, physical, or emotional, you begin with the assumption that the condition is real, that it possesses power, that it can either help or harm you, and from that assumption arises the desire to change it, to correct it, to manipulate it. But you see, once you have granted reality to the condition, you have already stepped outside the kingdom. You have accepted a second power. This is why manifestation, no matter how sincere, inevitably leads to frustration. Manifestation assumes that you, as a separate personal being, can use mental force to attract or create what you believe is missing. You may change the vocabulary, you may call it visualizing, intending, and attracting, but the mechanism is the same. The personal mind attempting to fix the world of form. And this, my friends, is the greatest obstruction to spiritual realization. For the moment you try to bring something into existence, you proclaim that it does not yet exist. You affirm lack. You affirm separation. You affirm that the supply you seek is outside your consciousness, waiting to be pulled in by technique. But the spiritual fact is that all supply, all abundance, all good already exists within your consciousness as the activity of God. There is nothing to create, nothing to attract, nothing to pull from the universe. There is only recognition. Consider this deeply. Every time you say, I must manifest more money, you silently declare, my good is not here. I lack. I am incomplete. And the moment you declare lack, no matter how positive your technique, your experience must reflect that belief, because your consciousness is the law unto your world. And what you acknowledge as truth becomes the pattern through which your life unfolds. Think for a moment of the birds of the air, of the lilies of the field. They do not manifest. They do not attract. They do not strive. Yet they are fed, clothed, sustained, and maintained by the invisible law of life that is forever functioning in perfect harmony. And so it is with you. Your life is not meant to be one of constant mental manipulation. It is meant to be an expression of harmony flowing from the inner presence that already knows your needs before you speak them. Manifestation fails because manifestation tries to change the outer picture without touching the inner truth. It is an attempt to rearrange shadows while ignoring the light that casts them. And for this reason, manifestation can only yield temporary results, results that must be maintained through further effort, further fear, and further striving. This is not the path of the infinite way. This is not the way of grace. The moment you recognize that the outer world cannot be the source of anything, you stop attempting to make it conform to your desires. You cease treating forms as powers. And in that stillness, when the feverish attempt to create good has ceased, the true supply begins to reveal itself effortlessly as the activity of the presence within your being. So let us be very clear. You do not seek more money, more security, or more opportunity. You seek the kingdom, the awareness of God as the only cause, the only substance, the only supply. When this inner knowing becomes your foundation, the forms necessary for your earthly journey will appear in perfect timing, not through force, but through divine unfoldment. This is the path of those who seek first, and find that all things are indeed added unto them. Now, let us move into a principle that, for many, becomes the turning point in their entire spiritual journey. It stands in direct contradiction to everything the world teaches about prosperity, self-help, and metaphysical law. And yet, it is this very principle that forms the cornerstone of the infinite way approach to supply. The principle is simply this: you cannot demonstrate supply. Supply is not something to be demonstrated, acquired, or attracted. Supply is the activity of God within you, and it exists fully before you ever think to seek it. This, my friends, is where the human mind rebels. The human mind believes it must achieve, must earn, must create, must compel the universe to respond to its desires. And so it sets out on an endless journey of demonstration, trying to manifest wealth, success, clients, relationships, security, never realizing that the very act of trying is a confession of spiritual ignorance. For if you truly understood the nature of God as the substance of all good, you would cease your attempts to demonstrate anything. You would rest. Let us examine this more deeply. You cannot demonstrate what already is. You cannot bring into your experience what is already established in your consciousness. You cannot attract what is inseparable from your being, and you cannot create what God has already completed. All demonstration, in the spiritual sense, is not the bringing forth of something new. It is the unveiling of what has eternally existed in the invisible. Everything you will ever need for your earthly experience, every opportunity, every relationship, every resource is already included within the infinite fullness of God's being, which is your being. That fullness cannot be added to, and it cannot be diminished. And so when you attempt to demonstrate supply, you are merely attempting to improve the shadows while ignoring the substance. You are working in the realm of effect while neglecting the realm of cause. Now hear this. Supply does not come to you. Supply flows through you. It is not a possession. It is not something you hold, accumulate, or defend. It is an activity, a living, radiant, spiritual activity of the divine presence, expressing itself as every form necessary for your daily life. This is why money cannot be supply. Money is merely the form supply takes at a given moment, and the moment you treat the form as the substance, you lose sight of the source. Imagine sunlight shining through a window. The warmth you feel on your hand is the effect. The sun itself is the cause. If the window shifts or the clouds pass, the warmth on your hand changes, but the sun remains unchanged. So it is with supply. Forms come and go, employment changes, financial conditions fluctuate, markets rise and fall, but the source never changes. And the moment you understand this, you cease trying to demonstrate warmth and begin resting in the certainty of the sun. Therefore, the question is never, how do I demonstrate more supply? The question is, am I living in the recognition of the presence that is supply itself? For the moment you abide in that recognition, the outer forms necessary to your well-being must appear by the law of spiritual unfoldment, not because you demanded them, but because cause always reveals itself as effect. And so, let us pause for a moment, not to think, not to imagine, not to affirm, but simply to acknowledge there is nothing for me to demonstrate. The fullness of supply is already present in my consciousness because God is present in my consciousness. Allow that truth to rest within you without seeking any immediate result. This is the beginning of spiritual supply, not demonstration, but recognition, not seeking, but resting. Let us now move deeper into the heart of supply itself. into the principle that must be understood if you are ever to live free of financial fear, strain, or the exhausting attempt to secure your good through outer means. And the principle is this: all true supply is invisible, and all visible forms of supply are merely its temporary appearance. Form is not substance, form is not cause, form is not power, form is only the shadow, cast by a deeper, invisible reality. You must grasp this if you wish to experience spiritual freedom. Every object you call supply, money, a bank account, a job, a client, a gift is nothing more than a manifestation of an inner state of consciousness. The moment you treat that form as the substance of your life, you step out of spiritual awareness and into material dependence, and wherever there is dependence on form, there will be fear of losing that form. But when you know the invisible cause, you cannot fear, because cause is infinite, unchanging, and ever present. Let us take this slowly. The world thinks supply is money, yet money is nothing but the symbol, the outer shell, the substance behind it, the invisible energy, intelligence, love, and activity of God is supply, and that supply flows ceaselessly, uninterrupted, from the infinite source within your own being. Whether you have $10 or 10,000, the presence of God as your consciousness remains the same. Supply is not increased by a number, nor diminished by one. The form changes, but the substance cannot. Everything that appears in your experience must first exist in consciousness. There is no exception. The job you call your livelihood has no power to support you. It is only the channel through which the invisible is expressing itself at this moment. The moment that channel is no longer needed, another appears. If you cling to the channel, you close the door on the infinite. But if you trust the invisible, the next expression unfolds without struggle. You may see now why the world suffers. It tries to live from the outside in. It attempts to accumulate the shadows, believing they are substance, believing the effect can sustain itself without cause. And so it fears, it competes, it worries, it hoards, it calculates. But all of this is unnecessary once you understand the spiritual fact that supply is the invisible activity of God, and form is only the passing outline of that activity. Now, observe what happens when you reverse the order, when you begin with spirit instead of matter. The moment you acknowledge God as the only substance, the only life, the only law, the only cause, you become receptive to its expression. You are no longer struggling to draw supply from the world. You are allowing supply to flow through you as wisdom, opportunity, harmony, and right action. The forms that appear will be exactly what is needed, and they will come without fear, without strain, without the anxious attempt to hold on to them. Let us rest briefly in this truth. All that appears in my life is the effect of an invisible presence. I do not depend on the form, I depend on the cause. Hold that not as affirmation, but as recognition. Understand this clearly. You do not live by money, you live by grace. And grace is never visible, never measurable, never limited by the forms through which it appears. Grace is infinite, and because it is infinite, it will always take new shape as needed, provided you do not cling to the old form out of fear. Therefore, whenever supply seems limited, do not attempt to improve the visible form. Do not attempt to manipulate the effect. Instead, turn within and acknowledge the invisible source. That recognition loosens your grip on the shadow and opens your consciousness to the substance. And as your consciousness opens, the outer picture must change, because the world you see is the world you have accepted within. In this understanding, there is no more fear of losing your good, for your good was never in the form to begin with. It has always been in the invisible, the infinite, the presence that cannot be diminished, depleted, or withheld. Now, my friends, having discerned the invisible nature of supply, let us come to the living principle that transforms your entire experience of provision. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. This statement, perhaps the most quoted of all scriptural teachings, has been repeated for centuries, but seldom understood. For the kingdom of God is not a place, not a reward, not a realm to be visited after death. The kingdom is a state of consciousness, your own consciousness, when it is free of fear, free of desire, free of the belief in powers other than God. To seek the kingdom first means to recognize God as the one and only source of your life before you turn to any outer form for safety. It means acknowledging spirit as the substance of supply before you look to your job, your investments, your savings, or your personal efforts. If you look to them first, you are seeking second. And when you seek second, you place your trust in the realm of effects, a realm that cannot support you. Let us explore this gently. When the human mind faces a financial problem, its first impulse is to plan, calculate, and fear. It searches frantically through visible channels for an answer. But this is precisely the moment when you must pause. This is the moment when you must refuse the temptation to seek second. For if you attempt to solve a financial appearance without first turning within, you will remain entangled in the very fear you are trying to escape. To seek first the kingdom is to establish contact with the invisible presence before taking any action. It is the practice of remembrance. Father, thou art the source, not this job, not this paycheck, not this form, thou alone. This recognition need not be lengthy. It need not be dramatic. A moment of genuine inner turning is more powerful than hours of anxious effort. Now observe what happens when you do this sincerely. Fear begins to subside, not because the outer condition has changed, but because you have shifted your foundation. You are no longer relying on the world of form. You are resting in the assurance that the invisible cause is already functioning perfectly, and that the necessary forms will reveal themselves without your manipulation. In this recognition, peace returns, and in that peace, guidance flows. Make this your practice. Before opening your bank account, pause. Before calculating your bills, pause. Before seeking ways to increase income, pause. In that pause, acknowledge the kingdom, acknowledge the presence, acknowledge that supply does not come from any external channel and therefore cannot be limited by one. And now, listen carefully. Financial fear is always the result of forgetting the kingdom. Fear arises the instant you believe that supply is outside you. The moment you believe money is your security, you become vulnerable. But when you know that God, your own consciousness, is the source, fear cannot touch you, regardless of the outer picture. This recognition is the great reversal. It is the turning from matter to spirit, from appearance to reality, from fear to trust. It is the entrance into a life governed not by worldly law, but by spiritual law. And under spiritual law, supply flows without obstruction, because it flows from an infinite that knows no insufficiency. As you begin living in this awareness, you will see that financial conditions do not bind you. Only your beliefs about them do. When the belief is corrected, the condition must change, for the outer picture always reflects the inner state. This is why Jesus taught, "Seek the kingdom first, for the kingdom is cause and the world is effect." Let us rest now in this gentle truth. All that the Father hath is mine, not will be mine, not may be mine, is mine now. Feel the peace that accompanies that recognition. It is not the peace of a solved problem. It is the peace of knowing there never was a problem in spirit. And that peace is the beginning of spiritual supply. Now that we have established the nature of true supply and the necessity of seeking the kingdom before attempting to correct outer conditions, let us turn our attention to the way supply actually appears in our experience. For many imagine that, once they accept spirit as their source, they must wait for some dramatic, supernatural event. But supply does not come through miracle in the sense the human mind conceives it. Supply comes by unfoldment, by the natural, effortless revelation of the invisible as the visible. Let us be very clear. When you abide in the realization of God as your supply, you do not cause anything to happen. You do not set spiritual laws in motion. You do not command the universe. You do not manipulate consciousness. You merely rest in the truth that God, the infinite, invisible presence, is already expressing itself as your life. And in that rest, the forms necessary to your earthly experience appear of themselves. This, my friends, is why the infinite way never teaches you to seek conditions. We teach you to recognize cause. When cause is realized, effect must follow, not by your effort, not by your planning, not by your anxiety, but by the operation of spiritual law. The moment you cease interfering with that law through fear or desire, supply flows in the manner perfectly suited to your present need. Let me give you some examples, not to entertain you, but to illustrate the principle. When an individual has learned to turn within before acting, opportunities begin to come to them without strain. A position opens at precisely the right moment. A client seeks them out unexpectedly. An idea dawns in consciousness that leads to right action. It may seem as though these things are coming from the world, but they are not. They are the outer shadows of an inner realization that God is the only source and the only activity of your life. Or consider another instance. A person facing a financial need enters silent recognition, not asking, not pleading, but acknowledging that supply is already complete in consciousness. They do not outline the solution. They do not demand a form. They rest, and within a day, or a week, or a month, the form appears, an overdue payment arrives, a gift is offered, an unexpected provision comes forth. The world calls this luck, coincidence, timing, but it is none of these. It is the natural unfoldment of what already existed in the invisible. Understand this. There is no disorder in God's universe. There is no delay, no withholding, no lapse in divine intelligence. The forms you require are always present in consciousness, awaiting only your recognition of their source. When you recognize the source, the form becomes visible, and when you forget the source, the form seems to disappear. But it is only seeming. The invisible remains intact, unchanged, forever whole. Now here is the essential point. You do not direct the form. You do not tell spirit how supply should appear. You do not say, let it come through this job, through this investment, through this person. For the moment you outline the form, you limit the infinite, you restrict supply to a narrow channel of your own imagining. The invisible source knows the perfect form, the perfect timing, the perfect sequence of events. Your task is only to stay receptive, to live in the inner assurance that supply is never absent. Therefore, whenever a financial appearance arises in your life, the first response must be stillness, not reaction, not planning, not fear, stillness, recognition, a quiet turning within to acknowledge, Father, you are the supply, not this condition, not this person, not my effort, you alone. And from that place of inner assurance, you proceed with whatever practical steps are required, without strain, without urgency, without believing that your actions produce the result. You will discover, as countless students have, that when you no longer try to force supply into form, form comes of its own accord. When you no longer chase opportunity, opportunity seeks you. When you no longer fear lack, lack dissolves. And when you no longer demand demonstrations, demonstrations occur not as events, but as the natural expression of your realized consciousness. The world calls this miracle. We call it grace. Grace is simply God's activity made visible. It requires no effort, no human manipulation, no mental power. It requires only recognition. When you recognize the infinite, the finite aligns itself in perfect order. That is how supply unfolds quietly, naturally, without strain, without haste, without your personal effort. It comes not because you seek it, but because you have stopped seeking outside yourself. Let us rest in that truth. Supply is the rhythm of God expressing itself. My only task is to be still and let that rhythm appear as my experience. When this becomes your way of life, financial fear dissolves. You live not by might, not by power, but by the invisible activity of spirit which is forever flowing, forever fulfilling, forever sufficient. Now, my friends, let us come to the practical side of this work, not practical in the worldly sense of techniques or methods, but practical in the spiritual sense. How does one actually live in the consciousness of infinite supply? For it is not enough to hear these principles, nor to agree with them intellectually. Truth must become a living experience, a daily recognition, until it permeates your entire being and becomes the atmosphere in which you walk. Let us begin with this. The realization of supply does not come through effort. It comes through awareness. It comes through the quiet turning within, again and again, until the presence becomes more real to you than the appearances of the world. Therefore, the first step is always the same. Be still. Before you look at your finances, before you begin your day, before you respond to any outer demand, pause, not to ask for anything, not to affirm anything, but simply to acknowledge the truth. Take a moment, one moment before you step into the activity of the world, and realize God is the substance of all supply. God is the life flowing as my life. God is the invisible source. from which all visible forms arise. You are not trying to make something happen. You are not trying to influence conditions. You are recognizing the reality that already is. And in that recognition, fear dissolves. In that recognition, the mind becomes receptive to divine impulse. In that recognition, you align yourself with the operation of spiritual law. This is why I tell students, do not measure the value of your practice by the length of time spent in meditation. One moment of clear recognition is of more value than an hour of mental activity, but consistency is essential, not effort consistency. A quiet returning to the inner presence many times each day, not as a duty, not as a ritual, but as a remembrance of what is true. Let us make this practical. When a financial worry crosses your mind, do not follow it, do not analyze it, do not attempt to solve it. Instead, pause and acknowledge, Father, thou art the source. Feel the shift. Feel the mind release its urgency. Feel the softening of that mental pressure that says, you must fix this. No, you must not fix anything. You must recognize the presence that already holds all in perfect order. And then listen, not with the ears, not with the intellect, but with that deep inner receptivity that senses without thinking. Guidance may not come in words. It may not come immediately. It may simply come as a quiet assurance, a feeling of peace, an inner knowing that all is well. And from that peace, you take whatever steps appear natural, without stress, without fear, without believing that your actions are the source of your supply. Every time you catch yourself worrying about money, or planning excessively, or feeling the pressure to secure your future, gently return to recognition. This is the practice, not to master conditions, but to master your awareness of the presence. Conditions will take care of themselves when the inner awareness is established. Let me give you a simple daily pattern, not as a technique, but as a rhythm of remembrance. Morning stillness before anything else. Acknowledge the presence. Midday pause, turn within for a moment. Just a moment, and rest. Evening recognition, review your day, not to judge it, but to remember that all activity was the activity of the One. Spontaneous moments of return, whenever fear, desire, or disturbance arises, pause and turn within. Do not force this. Allow it. Allow these moments to arise naturally. You will find that circumstances will begin to remind you. A difficulty arises. Pause. A bill arrives. Pause. A need appears. Pause. Let each appearance become a signal to turn within, not to fix the appearance, but to recognize the kingdom. As this becomes a way of life, something beautiful begins to happen. You start living from the center instead of the circumference. You are no longer driven by outer conditions, no longer swayed by appearances, no longer dependent on a particular channel. You begin to feel, even before outer evidence appears, that supply is flowing as peace, as clarity, as confidence, and from that inner fullness, the outer forms begin to reveal themselves in harmony. There is no strain here. There is no struggle. There is no forcing. This is the spiritual life, a constant returning to the truth that God alone is the source, and that nothing in the outer world has the power to add to or diminish your good. Practice this remembrance gently. Let it become the background of your day, the atmosphere in which you walk. You will find that as you live in this recognition, The need for financial demonstration begins to fade, not because you have more money, but because you have discovered the true supply. Now let us turn our attention to what naturally unfolds when an individual begins to live in this rhythm of inner recognition, when one no longer looks to the world for supply but acknowledges God as the invisible source of all good. And I say naturally because the fruits of spiritual realization do not come by effort, nor by human will, nor by disciplined striving. They come by grace, by the spontaneous activity of the infinite expressing itself in a consciousness that has become receptive. When you cease seeking supply in outer forms, the first fruit that appears is peace, not the peace that comes from a solved problem, but the peace that comes from knowing there never was a problem in spirit, a peace that is not dependent on a financial condition, not dependent on a bank account, not dependent on your skill, intelligence, or planning. It is the peace of resting in the awareness that God is the substance and activity of your life, and where there is God, nothing is lacking. From this peace arises freedom from fear. Fear dissolves because you no longer believe that your good is fragile, temporary, or limited by circumstances. You no longer cling to channels. You no longer dread their disappearance. You no longer imagine that you must secure yourself, for you have seen that the only security is the presence within, and that presence cannot be diminished or disrupted. When the invisible becomes your reliance, the visible loses all power to frighten you. Then, as fear dissolves, something remarkable begins to happen. Your outer experience begins to align with your inner assurance. Opportunities appear without strain. Doors open without forcing. Needs are met without you having to outline how they should be met. What the world calls synchronicities, good fortune, or luck, you recognize as grace, the invisible becoming visible according to divine order. But more than opportunities arises, clarity arises. Clarity about what is yours to do and what is not. Clarity about where to place your attention and where to release. When the mind is no longer clouded by fear, you begin to perceive guidance not as a voice, not as an instruction, but as a gentle inner knowing, a movement of your being that directs you effortlessly to right action. And along with clarity comes ease, not laziness, not passivity, but ease, the absence of struggle. Work continues, action continues, responsibilities continue, but the inner sense of burden disappears. You are no longer working to create supply. You are allowing supply to express itself through your work. This distinction transforms your entire experience of activity. What was once pressure becomes flow. What was once effort becomes unfoldment. Another fruit of this realization is fearless generosity. When you know that supply is infinite and spiritual, you no longer withhold, no longer cling, no longer fear giving. You share freely your resources, your time to your presence, because you know the source is inexhaustible. And in this giving, you find that more flows to you, not because you have given, but because you have ceased resisting the flow. Generosity is not a cause of supply. It is the evidence that you have recognized the source. Then, as this recognition deepens, you begin to observe that outer conditions no longer define your inner state. There may be times when forms shift, when an income changes, when a channel closes, when a need arises, but instead of reacting, you remain anchored in the awareness that God is still the source, and therefore nothing essential has changed. And because you remain anchored, the outer condition realigns itself in harmony. At this stage, you discover something even more profound. You stop living for supply altogether. Supply ceases to be a concern. It ceases to occupy your thought. It ceases to play a central role in your decisions. Why? Because you now live from the center, from the kingdom within. You are concerned only with abiding in the presence, only with maintaining the awareness of God as your life. And as you do, supply simply flows. It becomes a byproduct of realized consciousness, not the object of your seeking. And finally, the greatest fruit of all begins to dawn. You realize that supply was never something God gave you. Supply is God expressing itself as your experience of life. It is not an addition to your being. It is your being. It is the natural outflow of the infinite through the transparency of your consciousness. And when this becomes clear, financial fear becomes impossible. For how can the infinite lack? How can the eternal be insufficient? How can the presence that fills all space fail to provide in this awareness? You walk through life differently, not with pride, not with presumption, but with a quiet assurance that nothing essential can ever be missing, for the source is within you. You do not demonstrate supply, you reveal it. You do not chase security, you live from it. You do not seek the gifts of God. You rest in the giver. This is life under grace. This is the fruit of recognition. This is the natural consequence of knowing God as your supply. And now, my friends, as we bring this message to its close, let us return once more to the essence, for the essence is always simple. The whole of spiritual supply, the whole of your freedom from fear, the whole of your peace rests on one truth. You are not sustained by the world. You are sustained by the presence that lives within you. All that you have heard, all that has unfolded in this hour together, is meant to lead you to a single realization that the kingdom of God is the center of your being, and when you live from that center, the outer world takes its rightful place as the effect, never the cause. Let us pause here. Let us feel the stillness that comes when you no longer look outward for your good. Let us rest, even for a moment, in the knowing that the source of your supply is not out there in the changeable world of forms, but here within your own consciousness. As the very life of your being, no one can give you this realization. I cannot give it. Books cannot give it. Teachings cannot give it. They can only point, illuminate, invite. But the recognition itself must arise within you. In the quiet, wordless space where you meet the presence face to face, heart to heart, being to being, I ask nothing of you except this. Let the inner turning become your way of life. Let the pause become your refuge. Let the recognition become your habit. Whenever you are tempted to fear, turn within. Whenever lack appears in the world of form, turn within. Whenever the mind begins to calculate, to worry, to outline, turn within, not to get something, not to change a condition, but to remember the reality that never changes. For the moment you do, you discover that the presence has always been there, silent, patient, whole. It has never left you. It has never withheld anything from you. It has never required anything of you except your recognition. And when recognition dawns, even faintly, the entire structure of fear begins to dissolve. This is the invitation, live from the center, live from the invisible, live from the kingdom. Do not wait for outer improvement. Do not wait for conditions to justify your trust. Trust is the beginning, not the result. Seek first, not second. Not after the problem is solved. Not after you feel secure. Seek first the kingdom of God, and the things added will come of themselves in perfect order, in perfect timing, as the natural expression of the infinite. Remember this: you do not walk this path to acquire supply. You walk this path to awaken to the presence that is your life. Supply is merely the echo of that awakening. Peace is its fragrance. Freedom is its light. And the moment you discover that your good has never been outside you, the moment you realize that the entire universe of spirit is embodied in your consciousness, you will understand why Jesus could say, "All that the Father hath is yours." Not someday, not when you have perfected yourself, but now, in this very moment, because the infinite is the substance of your being. So let us leave this time together with a quiet assurance, not an emotional feeling, not a mental conviction, but a deep inner knowing that nothing essential can ever be taken from you, because nothing essential lies outside you. The only true supply is the presence within, and that presence is infinite. Rest in that, live from that. Let that be your foundation, your beginning, your middle, and your end. And as you walk through your days, let your remembrance be simple. The kingdom is within me, the source is within me. All that I require flows from the infinite that I am. With this recognition, you step into a life not governed by circumstances, but by consciousness, not driven by fear, but guided by grace, not lived from the outside in, but from the inside out. This is the way of spirit. This is the way of the infinite. This is the way revealed by the Christ within you. Go now in that awareness and let the presence live your life.